Hi, my name is Liz Mueller, and I am here at the Copper Canyon Press stand at the local farmers market in Port Townsend, Washington. And I'm here today with local poet and translator Red Pine. And Red Pine, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Bill Porter, and whenever I translate under the inspiration of the muse Red Pine. And so when I publish books of translations, I always publish them under the name Red Pine.
So, how did you get started in translating, and what was really your drive to translate a bunch of these Chinese poets?
Well, when I was living in Taiwan, I was living in a Buddhist monastery, and when you're in a monastery, you have lots of time on your hands. You can only meditate so many hours a day. And so I started working on my Chinese, especially classical, ancient Chinese, because all the Buddhist texts are in ancient Chinese. And so as an exercise, I tried doing some translations of Buddhist poetry just to improve my Chinese. And I discovered how much I loved translating, the art of translation. And when I left the monastery about 3 years later, I tried to publish some of my translations. And I wrote to this man named John Blofeld, who's another author in my area of work. And he encouraged me to translate this entire book here, all the poems of Cold Mountain, which I did, and I eventually published my first book in 1983 with Copper Canyon here in Port Townsend, and since then I've published 12 books of translations.
So, speaking of Cold Mountain, I know that you've traveled to some of the places where many of these poems were written. What would you say is the benefit of actually being in or experiencing the place that the poets wrote from, even though there's sort of such a time gap often between when the writer was writing and when you're visiting?
Well, in poetry especially, images are so important. And many of the images in Chinese poetry are based on the landscape. So to actually be in the place, to see the slope of the mountain, the kind of trees that grow there, the way the air and the clouds look, the way the water flows, all of this helps translate a poem, because these images are going to be in that poem I'm going to translate.
So what would you say is the hardest part of translation, especially with, Chinese, you have these characters that are so far from the English text. What would you say is the hardest part of translating?
The hardest part of translation is forgetting the original. You have to forget it. You have to go beyond it, because the original poem is never the poem. The original poem is just what one poet put on the page because they had to use a language. What a translator does is to find out where the real original poem came from, and then to add to that, to sort of bring out another facet of what the original poem really was.
So would you say that you're adding sort of another layer on top of the poem then?
Yeah, it's very much like dancing.
Okay.
You know, the original is out there dancing on the dance floor, and you have to find the movement, the rhythm, in order to dance with it,
okay,
without stepping on the feet of your dance partner.
And what would you say is maybe the most rewarding experience? Do you have an anecdote of someone, was looking for some of these poems and happy to have found your translations or something like that?
The real benefit is I don't have to have a job. I get to stay home and I can work whenever I feel like it.
Okay.
I usually work in the morning and then goof off all afternoon, wait for the ball game to come on TV.
So translating is your job?
That's all I do, is I translate, and I travel in China every year too. I take small groups of people to China to help pay my expenses.
And do you have any upcoming books that we should know about?
Yeah, I'm working on a book called Zen Baggage right now. A book about the early patriarchs of Zen and about what's going on today in China regarding Zen practice. I just got back and interviewed all the leading Zen masters of China, and I have about 25 hours of interviews I have to sort of go through and find a book somewhere in there.
Do you think there's any danger in bringing so much sort of Chinese and Zen poetry to our country? I know that it's almost Zen has become sort of a commodity in a sense here, and do you feel there's any danger in that, or is there something pure about poetry?
Well, the Chinese word poetry means words from the heart. So whenever words do come from the heart, they find an audience. So Zen has the ability, and poetry has the ability, to break through that superficial impression that everything's a commodity.
So, Red, would you please read us a poem from one of your books?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought I'd read one from this collection. It's called the Qianjia Shi. It's the most famous anthology of Chinese poetry ever compiled. For the last 700 years, all Chinese school children have had to memorize the entire anthology. And so all Chinese, until modern times, till the 50s, know this one by heart. And so I'll read the first poem in the collection by a poet named Meng Haoran. And of course, the Chinese never read their poetry until modern times. They always sang it. So this one, it goes, 春眠不觉少，处处闻啼鸟，夜来风雨声，花落知多少。Sleeping in spring, oblivious of dawn, everywhere I hear birds. After the wind and rain last night, I wonder how many petals fell. It was a poem by Meng Haoran, who lived around 750 AD.
Again, I'm Liz Mueller here at the Port Townsend Farmers Market from Copper Canyon Press. We're here with Red Pine. We want to thank him for coming out today and being with us. And again, we've got two books by him, The Songs of Cold Mountain and Poems of the Masters. Both are phenomenal translations of Chinese poets. And check us out on the internet. We're at www.coppercanyonpress.org. Thanks so much.